Hi, everybody. Good evening. I want to welcome you to this evening's session, Growing Seeds of Hope, in the late stage Seeds of Hope. So as before, if anybody has questions is having difficulties with the technology, you can go ahead and type in the bottom right-hand corner near the word send. Send in any technical issues that you're having, and my colleague Christine will be able to assist you. All right. So tonight's session is Growing Seeds of Hope, as I said. And so our learning outcomes for this evening are to develop an understanding of hope in this journey as a care partner, to identify ways of maintaining hope in the face of this progressive illness that is dementia, to understand the importance of caring for oneself as a family care partner, and to describe when and how to ask for help. So before I introduce our topic and our speaker, for this evening, I just want to check in for a second regarding last week's reflection questions. So for those of you who participated in last week's session, the reflection questions were, and that session was with Angie Allen, the registered psychologist, and the session was entitled Taking Care of You. So the reflection questions from last week were, what are some signs of grief that you have noticed in yourself? Who can you share these feelings with? How will you take care of yourself when you are experiencing difficult emotions? And what can you do to help yourself adjust to changes that are causing grief? So if anyone has anything that they would like to share regarding the questions from last week's session, please feel free to go ahead and start typing in that bottom right-hand corner. Again, these questions aren't, they're not homework, you don't have to do them, but they're there to help people process some of the information that we cover in a session. So again, if anybody has anything that they would like to share regarding those reflection questions from last week, please go ahead and type that in the bottom right-hand corner. I see a couple people are typing, but I'm not sure if it's about the sound or the reflection questions. So I'm just going to give you a moment here. All right, so it doesn't look like anyone has anything that they want to share regarding last week's reflection questions. So we're going to begin our session for this evening, which again is titled Growing Seeds of Hope. So tonight we have hope therapist Wendy Eady, and she's going to be talking to us about taking care of you as a care partner by maintaining hope and getting support. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Wendy.
Well, welcome to all of you. Tonight we're going to be talking about the idea of being hopeful at the same time as we recognize what it means to love someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's disease. This, of course, is not always the easiest thing because Alzheimer's disease comes with a diagnosis that predicts a future that isn't all that promising. So I want to start this evening, though, because hope is a kind of flexible and positive idea. So I wanted to start with a short reading that you'll be able to find quite easily if you look for it on the internet. And it's called If You Can. If you can start the day without caffeine, if you can get going without pep pills, If you can always be cheerful, ignoring aches and pains. If you can resist complaining and boring people with your troubles. If you can eat the same food day after day and be grateful for it. If you can understand it when your loved ones are too busy to give you any time. If you can overlook it when people take it out on you, when through no fault of yours something goes wrong. If you can take criticism and blame without resentment. If you can resist the temptation to treat rich people better than poor people. If you can ignore a friend's limited education and never correct. If you can face the world without lies and deceit. If you can conquer tension without medical help. If you can relax without liquor. If you can sleep without the aid of drugs, then you are probably the family dog.
I truly enjoy that reading, Wendy. And for participants, if you do want to find that reading, like some of our other handouts from this evening, they will be accessible through Dropbox. Sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
No problem. So you might be wondering, why do we bother with a topic like hope? And the reason that we bother is because people who have hope act differently than people who don't have hope. So when we have hope, we act as if a good future could happen. We act in such a way that we might contribute to a good future happening. And in general, hope is a healthy, positive experience. And it allows us, when we have hope, it allows us to think about the future and be okay at the same time. So to think about the future, but be okay in the present. And hope is one of many kinds of positive emotions that are quite commonly studied in psychology today. So some other positive emotions are things like love and joy, peace, contentment, amusement, pride, awe, interest, and inspiration. These are some other positive emotions. And most of those are a kind of thing that we experience in the present. Hope is the one positive emotion that we experience in the present, but it's when we're thinking about the future. So many people have studied hope in the last 20 or 30 years. And of course, each one who studies hope comes up with their own definition, depending on what it is that they're trying to achieve or that they're interested in. When people who study, mainly college students, have come up with definitions of hope, usually those are very goal-oriented. There's one scholar called Rick Snyder who defines hope in terms of having a sense of where to go and how to get there. He talks about having the will and the way to get to some future thing that we really want to happen. When people talk about hope in regard to illness, though, they're not usually quite as goal-focused, because of course we often can't really set the goal that we'd like to set, because we can't control the thing that's taking away our hope. Things that take away our hope vary according to what the situation that we have is. When I first began to study hope in the early 1990s, we talked about these things as being threats to hope or barriers to hope. One time, though, maybe about 15 years ago, one of the people who was studying hope with adolescents was talking to a group of grade 8 boys, and she was asking them to draw things that take away their hope. And one boy drew something that looked amazingly like a bloodsucker. You know, those terrible things that you get when you go in the lake and they come onto your skin. They're sucking out your blood. Anyway, she asked him about the bloodsucker that he'd drawn, because you never really know what teenage boys are doing to you when you give them a project. This boy said, well, really, this wasn't a bloodsucker that he'd drawn. It was a hope sucker. He said that a hope sucker, this is how a hope sucker works. It's you're going along and you're actually not even necessarily thinking about hope. You're just doing the best you can. And then something comes along and it sucks out all your hope. Now, when we think about Alzheimer's disease, the things that suck out our hope tend to be, well, for example, all the disabilities that come along with Alzheimer's disease, the forgetfulness, the physical deterioration, sometimes the personalities, the dependence that people get, the ungratitude, because there are probably some of you in this group who have experienced being a caregiver, or a care partner, the loved one of someone with dementia, only to find that the help that you so freely offer isn't always received with gratitude. It is these things that suck out our hope, as well as the fact that even when we decide to get help, can't always get the sort of help we want. We look for a place for someone to live, and most of their needs are taken care of in that place, but not really with the high standard that we think of. All of these things suck out our hope. We may find that we could use the help of family members, but those family members, well, it may be that they're saying, oh, well, Mom isn't as bad as you think. Really, I saw Mom yesterday and she was talking and, you know, there wasn't such a problem, really. Or it might be that they're just not helping as much or in the way that we need them to. All of these are the hope suckers that come along with loving someone who has dementia. I think that one of the most useful definitions of hope in the context of illness that I know of was written by someone named Charlotte Stevenson, who is a nurse, and she wrote that hope is a process of anticipation involving the interaction of thinking, feeling, acting, and relating. Thinking, feeling, acting, and relating. That's directed toward a future fulfillment that is personally meaningful. Future fulfillment that's personally meaningful. And in a few minutes, we're going to come back to that and think about what it means to think, feel, act, and relate in a hopeful way. But other people have come at the topic from different points of view, and it's worth looking at those. For example, William Lynch takes the emotional view. He says that hope is the fundamental knowledge and feeling that there is a way out of difficulty, that things can work out, that we as humans can somehow handle and manage our reality. It's that sense of, well, things will be okay somehow, that emotional sense. Rana Jevney, who was my mentor at the Hope Foundation, which is a center for hope studies here in Edmonton, she wrote, studying cancer, hope is the yes to life. And David W. Orr, in the face of adversity, the commitment to positivity in the face of adversity. And I think with that definition, quite often hope for care partners of people with dementia means not necessarily always being positive and sunny and upbeat, but that idea that I will do the best that I can do given the circumstances that I have. The best that I can do given the circumstances that I have. That is a commitment to positivity. So hope allows us, as I said before, to think about the future and be okay in the present at the same time. And more than that, it allows us to think about the future, live with the hope suckers, all the things that take away our hope, and still be okay in the present. And sometimes it's a very tall order. So, what are some ways that we can keep our own hope in front of us, where we can see it and where we can act on it, given that we do act differently when we are hopeful than we do when we're not hopeful? And what are some ways that we can make that hope bigger for ourselves? Well, one way is to develop the ability to speak in a language of hope. And speaking in a language of hope can be very simple, a very simple language of hope. And even though we may speak it, the challenge is to actually feel hope while we speak it. So remember, we're talking about thinking, feeling, acting, and relating. The simplest language of hope is the very simple language of I hope. And the challenge in the language of I hope is to be talking about hope and not about the opposite of hope. Now, often on a first glance, we think, well, what is the opposite of hope? Is the opposite of hope hopelessness? So am I extremely hopeful or extremely hopeless? And those two are opposites. We have found over many years of talking, excuse me, with people about hope, that actually hope and hopelessness aren't so much opposites. Often they appear at the same time, right alongside one another. We can have hope about something and be quite hopeless about it at the same time, which doesn't seem to make much sense. But because hope and hopelessness are there right in front of us, we can often make one bigger and one smaller so that we can magnify or enhance hope. And alongside a magnified hope, our hopelessness will kind of recede into the background. I find this is true in my own life on any given day. I can find that that all the negatives in my life, if I list them, for example, if I start listing all the things that are wrong in my current life or the things that I'm dissatisfied with, I can usually get quite a list going. And the more that I work on that list, the more dissatisfied I become. If I take the other side of the slate and begin to list those things for which I'm grateful, those things that are working out well, those things that are turning out better than I expected, it affects the way that I feel, and the way that I feel will affect the way that I act. So if hopelessness is not the opposite of hope, then what is? For the most part, the opposite of hope tends to be fear. And if not fear, then uncertainty. These are the things that drag hope down. Going back to speaking in a simple language of I hope, if we, well, let's give an example of something over which we don't have any control, which is maybe the easiest way to start. When we think about a picnic, for example, if we're thinking about a picnic, setting a date for a picnic, and we say, I hope it doesn't rain. I hope it doesn't rain. Think of what the real object of that sentence is, the thing that we think about when we say it. Quite often we're thinking then about rain. We mentioned rain. We're thinking about what the picnic will be like in the rain. All our friends staying home for the picnic because it's raining, sitting under umbrellas, being cold at the picnic, soggy hot dog buns from the rain falling on them. I think of all the things that make a picnic miserable, even though we use the word hope.
Sorry, Wendy, if it's
Mhm.
possible, we just had a little cutout in the sound. And one of our participants has just asked if it would be possible, could you repeat the opposite of hope?
Fear.
Fear. Did you catch that, Sue? That the
Mhm.
opposite of hope is fear.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So
Sorry
when
about that.
so that when we talk about fear as being the opposite of hope, what we often do, and in our example of the picnic, when we say, I hope it doesn't rain, what we're really expressing so much our hope, but our fear that it will rain. So when we are wanting to express hope, we want to talk about that thing which we hope for, not that thing which we hope against. So in the example of our picnic, we are hoping for sunshine. We're hoping for a nice day. And when we think about sunshine in the context of a picnic, we're imagining our friends coming to the picnic, taking off their sweaters, putting on their sunscreen, saying, "My, you picked a wonderful day for this picnic." Everyone playing games, the barbecue, the fun that we have in the sun. This is a simple example of something over which we actually don't have any control over whether it will rain or shine, but we do have some control over how we regard the picnic in the future. Do we regard it with hope, or do we regard it more with fear that it won't turn out? This example does stretch then. It stretches to those things over which we control. Because when we're expecting things to go poorly, we tend to, well, we kind of prepare for the worst, and sometimes when things turn out better, we don't even notice for a while. So with regard to thinking about hope and being the caregiver for someone who has Alzheimer's, of course, hope changes over the course of a disease. So when a disease is, the first thing we hope in the case of Alzheimer's disease is that the diagnosis is wrong. This is a reasonable hope right at the beginning, because it'll be so much easier if the diagnosis is wrong. So we can hope that's wrong for a while. And we can hope that a cure will come into being before the person gets too bad. Or we can hope that the disease won't progress. All of these are very legitimate hopes. You see, no one can tell us what to hope for. I like to think of the big hopes, the big unreasonable hopes, as not so much false hopes, which is what they used to call them when I first came into the area of hope studies. There were a lot of articles written about false hope and the negative effects of false hope and what doctors needed to do to work against false hope, to stamp it out in people. But in more recent years, we don't think much about false hope at all because, well, simply because a lot of things that may seem at one time like false hope actually can be true at a later time. For example, maybe back in the 1700s, people were trying to fly without any success at all. And if your son said, "Well, when I grow up, I'm going to fly," you would have said, "This is a false hope. This is unreasonable. Get a real job. Be a blacksmith. Do something useful." However, in this day and age, if your son said, "I want to fly," you would probably get for him or help him get what are going to be the qualifications for a pilot's license, or perhaps the entrance requirements to get into the kinds of schools that will later prepare that person to be an astronaut. So over time, what seems like false hope at one point often can be much less false hope in the future. It can be perfectly reasonable. Imagine back in the 1980s if you had thought of carrying your little phone around in your pocket and writing back and forth to your friends all day on it, and well, you wouldn't even have thought of doing your email because we weren't doing email, and this was back in the 1980s. So so what can seem like false hope at one point can be quite legitimate at another point, and not that many years apart. I like to think of these, what seem like unreasonable hopes now, as audacious hopes. So when we have an audacious hope, we don't have to say it's completely unrealistic. Audacious hopers hope for things that no practical person would dream of hoping for. Things we are certain that can never happen. But they can still be hope, legitimate hopes. So we can still hope for a cure for Alzheimer's disease, for example. We can still hope for that. There's no reason not to hope for it. It's just a question of what shall we do while we're waiting for that to happen. And if we hope for it, we might actually do some things to encourage it. Maybe we will participate in some level of research, or give money to a project, or help in a fundraising effort of some sort. But if we only hope for a cure for Alzheimer's and we're not actually the person in the lab studying it, we're probably not doing everything that we could have, that we could do. So what kind of hopes can we have at the same time that we love someone who has dementia? What kind of hopes? How is it possible to love someone who has dementia and have hope at the same time? Well, sometimes people say, I hope that I can show that I'm loyal to the person that I love. I hope that I can show that I'm loyal. And I think this language, although it's not always expressed in exactly this way, but the idea of being loyal is very near and dear to the hearts, particularly of people who are the spouse of someone who has dementia. Because often they've thought that for their whole life, they've thought, well, in order
We just had a little cut in the internet connection, so we're back, and I'm just going to get Wendy. You were talking about loyalty.
Yeah, I'm just going to go back to one hope that people often do express, not always in the exact language, but I hope that I will be able to show that I am loyal to the person that I love. And being loyal at one point in life doesn't always equate to being loyal at other points in life. I think that often when we do these sessions live and in person, and we're in conversation with people, often the spouses of people who have Alzheimer's will be very distressed at the idea that their spouse may have to go and live in some other facility, because it seems to them that loyalty would be the same as having that person at home, no matter what it took to be able to look after them. But like hope, loyalty can change over time. And sometimes people can also change their view of what loyalty would be. So often they do express the hope that they can be loyal to the person that they love, no matter what form that might seem to take. Other people hope to get the best possible care for the people they love, the best possible care, the best possible place to live, the best possible lifestyle for the person they love. This is the hope that we sometimes have to put in place when we can't, through our own devices, affect a cure. And sometimes people express really simple hopes for themselves, like, I hope to get more rest. I hope to have more free time. I hope to be less anxious, less stressed. These are reasonable hopes that you might be able to think of for yourself. And so I invite you to take a second and just think of, what is one hope that you have as a care partner of someone who has dementia? What is one personal hope in the very simple, shallow language of I hope?
So Wendy, when you're asking people to think of this, would you like them to share?
If anybody wants to, yeah.
Okay. If people would like to share, again, go ahead and type in that bottom right-hand corner near the word send. So what would be that to use Wendy's language, that simple hope that you would have in caring for the person that you are caring for?
As a caregiver.
As a care partner. So we've got a couple people typing here, so we'll give you guys a moment. Still typing. Barb says, I hope that she is happy. That they are happy and comfortable. I would hope that the person living with a diagnosis feels safe and loved. Thank you for everyone who is sharing, and I know a couple people are still typing. But absolutely, I feel like those would be common responses. Safe is a really good one. Yeah, I agree, Sue. Yeah, I think those would be very common themes.
Yeah. And we do, and some of these are things over which we might have control, and some of them are things that we don't have control over. Right now I live in a long-term care center, actually, because my husband is in long-term care, and we live in a place where you can live with someone who's getting long-term care. And across the hall from us is a lady, we'll call her Judy, who the first day that I was there, I noticed that she was in our hallway, but she didn't seem to know exactly where her room was. And I thought, gee, she must be new, just like us. And I actually went and got someone and asked, which was her room, and they said which was her room. And so we helped her find her room and go into it, and that was okay. But then a couple days later, I noticed that she was lost in the hall again and looking for her room. But one thing that I will say is that I've lived there 8 months now, and I notice often that when she leaves the dining room and she's disoriented and starting off the wrong way, that some of the caregivers in the facility will shout out, Judy, go down to the end of the hall and turn left. And of course, Judy doesn't really respond to that at all. If they get her turned in the right direction, she'll be going down to the end of the hall, but it won't cause her to turn left. And I think that these caregivers, in wanting to be helpful, because usually they go and just take her right then. They're doing something else when they're calling out to her. But they're hoping that if she goes down there enough times, they're hoping that she'll learn where her room is. They're hoping that she could go to the end of the hall and then turn left. But in fact, when on the times when Judy can't find her room, that is not really, that's not something that they can hope for right then. Because when she can't find her room, she also doesn't really have any sense of where she is, or she's having a much larger disorientation than that. And so they're hoping that practice will make perfect, because that's how we're organized in our normal, ordinary way of thinking. We're thinking, if you just find that room a few times, you'll get the cues and you'll find it. But in fact, for Judy, that is not in place. Is Judy safe? Yes, she is safe. Is she comfortable? Well, she's comfortable to the degree that when she can't find her room, there are people around who will guide her there, and we've learned things not to do, not to shout at her or give her a lot of instructions, but just to fall in beside her and chat with her. Because if you fall in beside her and chat with her, she'll keep going in your same direction. And when she gets to her room, if you just say, "Oh, here's your room," she'll just go into her room. But so the things that we do hope for in terms of safe and comfortable and happy, there are some actions that we can take around that, which is why it's good to name them in our list of hopes, because there are actions that we can take around them. And they may not be the actions that we would have taken in the past to make sure that someone was safe and comfortable and happy. One thing that helps me to have hope and think of dementia at the same time is to think of dementia as being something very mysterious. It really is a mysterious thing that we, when we don't have dementia, that we're not capable of fully understanding. If we see enough of it over enough years, we get used to recognizing its effects. But we aren't really capable of predicting how it will be or what that person might understand from the inside. And I find that the idea of mysterious is a more whole idea to me, because I can think then, what is the mystery here? What is it that we have to solve today in order to be present for this person?
I like that. Yeah, I like that, Wendy.
Yeah.
Mystery. Well, and especially because there is so much with dementia that we don't know. I think, which is often can be a frustration for families and care partners in general, is that because of the mystery that we're going into of the unknown, that it helps us reframe that hope.
Yeah, and realize that a different day, that on different days things will be different, and for no accountable reason. Normally we think about reasons why things are different on different days. I had a good friend who developed Alzheimer's disease in his 80s. He had always been a very capable tech person, so he could always help you manage your computer. If a new gadget came out, he'd be the first person to have it, to know how to use it. You could call him up for that all the time. And when he got, as his Alzheimer's disease progressed, there were still days when he was very lucid. And there were days when he could turn on his computer and boot it up and do things. And there were days when he couldn't. And what was quite fascinating to me about it is that he was aware that of the different kinds of days. Sometimes he would call me up and he would say, "Hi, Wendy, I just thought I'd call you today while I can remember who you are." And so he did have an awareness that there were lots of days on which he couldn't call people, or if when they called him, he couldn't relate to them. So he had a very pragmatic attitude, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
If it seemed to him when he was looking at the phone that he knew somebody he could call, then he just called them, because right now was a time when he could do that.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a general experience for people with dementia, but it was an experience that he had quite often near the beginning, and not so often later on, but still occasionally.
That's very curious.
So for him, it was quite reasonable for any of us to hope that he might have a better day, because you know what, he just might be.
Mm-hmm.
And when he was, then that was something that we could all enjoy. I wonder if anybody has any questions or any remark that they'd like to make at this point.
Absolutely. So again, if anybody has any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the in that right-hand corner near the word send. We've got someone typing. Mm-hmm. Oh, it was about they're having some technical issues. So, Sue, I know that my colleague Christine is being kind of troubleshoot any technical issues. But does anybody have any questions or comments for Wendy at this point? Doesn't look like it at this point, Wendy. So yeah.
All right. So let's go on then. So we've talked about some ways, some practical approaches that we can have to hope. One of them is to recognize hope suckers, things that take away our hope, just to recognize them. And some of them we might actually even be able to avoid. For example, you know, the progression of dementia is something that we can't really avoid. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen. But sometimes some of the things that make dementia seem the most troubling, some of those things we can avoid. And I know that in the course of the last few sessions, people have had practical suggestions of things that you can do. And I know someone right now whose husband is constantly asking her what day it is. He gets up in the morning and he asks what day it is, and she tells him it's Tuesday, and then a few minutes later he asks what day is it, and she tells him it's Tuesday, and then he asks what day is it, and she tells him it's Tuesday. This is a huge hope sucker for her. Mm-hmm. Because well, it's, you know, he's been up for 10 minutes and he's already asked what day it is 3 times, and Tuesday is a fairly long day. And just contemplate the rest of Tuesday with constantly being asked what day it is almost more than she can bear. And to avoid some of this dread that develops in her, and I think it really is a dread of what the rest of the day will be like, she's being pretty creative in finding ways that don't solve the problem, but they avoid dread. If she's up before him, she does many things very quickly. She writes on a blackboard, "Today is Tuesday." She circles the day on the calendar. She leaves a note on the fridge, a note on the bedroom door, a note on the bathroom mirror. She leaves notes all around the place saying, today is Tuesday. So that when he first asks what day is, she can say it's Tuesday, but went into the bathroom and he asks what day it is, she can say, I don't know, but look on the mirror. And he'll say, oh, it's Tuesday. And she's made a game out of thinking how many creative ways she can prepare in it for that question that haunts him every morning. Does it solve the problem? It doesn't solve the problem, but somehow by reducing her anxiety about it and also giving him a number of exposures to ways of finding out what day it is. She always leaves the newspaper out with the masthead that's showing the date. By having a variety of ways, eventually he does stop asking, which he probably would anyway. But he does stop asking. But in the meantime, they both have just a little bit of fun with figuring it out. So ways of avoiding what are really hope suckers. We could also call them problems. We could call them irritants. We could call them annoyances. But in the realm of hope, these are the things that cause us to absolutely dread the future. One way, of course, that we can help to minimize hope suckers is to just stay in the present, to reduce our worry about the future by reducing the amount that we think about the future. This doesn't mean that we don't have a future, that we pretend there isn't any, but it means we focus on what's working well today. There are a lot of kind of popular ideas about this. Seize the day, live in the moment. These may seem kind of cliche, but sometimes they're what we've got, particularly if we have an unpleasant future that we're thinking towards. The question being, what is going well today? What is turning out okay today? Sometimes staying in the present is about the best we can do for being hopeful. Sometimes seeing the world as a place where hopeful things can happen, where things can turn out better than we expected, is a good way of maintaining a kind of hopeful stance. For example, many things have turned out better than we expect throughout history. When Roger Bannister decided that he wanted to run a mile in less than 4 minutes, there wasn't really an expectation around that was possible. He was a med student, and actually the prevailing idea in the medicine at the time was that it wasn't possible for the human body to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. Roger Bannister decided just to ignore all this advice, though, and try. You see, there was a 0% chance that it could be achieved, never been achieved. A 0% chance. It was impossible because it had never been done. Roger Bannister, for some reason, though, was able to do it. He was able to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. And even though no one had ever been able to do that in recorded history, another person was able to do it just 3 weeks later. It's still not easy, but a few thousand people have done it now. We think now that it's highly possible. So impossible things that can be impossible at one time, are possible at other times. And remembering this stuff is one way for us to think of the world as a hopeful place. A place where impossible things can happen. A place where things can turn out better than we expected. Better than we expected. Of course, when we first learn about a diagnosis of dementia, we just expect the worst. We think of other people we've known who have dementia, and we just think, oh, we don't want this. We can't have this. But often after the fact, people will say, I was able to cope better than I thought I would. I was able to relate to Mom, even though I thought it would be very difficult to do so. We were able to find a good place for her to live. These are the kinds of things that people report when things have turned out better than they expected. And when we see the world as a place where things could turn out better than we expected, even if we don't have a detailed plan, then it's easier to be hopeful. Some people say, well, life is a journey that's worth taking, even if the last few years are difficult. Even if the last few years are difficult, life is a journey that's worth taking. You know, in the year 1900, the average American man died at 49. At 49, just 117 years ago. So we have expanded and extended our life expectancy hugely since then. And most people, very few people do, but most people don't get dementia until long after 49. Probably the incidence of Alzheimer's disease was extremely low when people only lived to be 49. Now, they say that 1 in 2 people over the age of 85 will show some signs, maybe early signs, of dementia. And even though this seems like a kind of frightening thing, I heard someone say on the radio the other day, we tend to focus, on the fact that 1 out of 2 people over 85 will show some signs of dementia. What we never mention is that half of the people over 85 don't show any at all. And lots of people over 95 don't show any at all. Life is a journey worth taking, even if the last few years may be difficult. Medical advances have given us many good years in later life, and for the most part, only a few bad ones. Many good years have been given, only a few bad ones at the end. To see the world as a hopeful place, for most of us, requires us to see the world as a place where we are not alone. And if we remember back to Charlotte Stevenson's definition, she talked about hope in terms of thinking, feeling, acting, and relating. And perhaps the relational aspect of hope is the most important one of all, because particularly when we're a care partner, it's quite easy to begin to see ourselves as the main helper, as being quite alone, as being a person that can't necessarily ask for help or expect support. Tend to see it as a lonely journey. But studies of hope have shown that one of the most important ways of enhancing hope is to develop a mindset of not being alone, of being able to find people who give you hope, and hang out with them. Hang out with them. Spend time with them. Phone them. Have coffee with them. Perhaps all of you have had an experience sometime of working somewhere where whenever you have a coffee break, people get together and complain. In the place where I currently stay, the table of people who complain about whatever went on in the daily news, and largely they complain about paying their taxes and various other things. And and I must say that I find it a difficult dinner conversation to overhear night after night, and I wouldn't have it at my own dinner table if I could avoid it. Not that I love paying taxes all the time, but it's not. It doesn't lift my spirits, and if anything, it kind of makes me feel sort of vulnerable and alone out there. But find people who are hopeful and hang out with them and let them be involved with you in a way that is helpful to you as a care partner. This is not easy. Asking for help is one of the most difficult things that we can find to do. I think primarily in our culture, even though people might have said that it takes a village to raise a child, said it as if they really believe it. For the most part, in our culture, we talk about independence. And if you ever are involved in any rehab organizations, they're always raising money around independence, making people independent. And the idea of being independent is something that we tend to take on very early. At 2, for example, just try to tie the shoe of a 2-year-old. No, she'll say, I can do it myself. Me tie my shoe. Independence starts early, our quest for it, and lasts long. And independence is a good thing, but it's not always, more of a good thing is not always better. So I do want to talk about the importance of getting help. I always think of it this way. When you take a plane and you get on the plane, they give you the little lecture, you know, about, well, they often, if you're going to be flying over water, they give you a big demonstration of how to use the life jacket. You know, you reach out under the seat and you get it out of its plastic container, and you unroll it, and then you put your arms through it, and you snap up the snaps, and then you can decide whether you want to inflate it with your mouth or let it automatically inflate, but you don't inflate it till you left the plane already. And I just sleep through that part of the presentation, because I figure if I fell from 30,000 feet into water, I know myself, I would not be present to undo the life jacket. So I don't worry too much about that. The piece that I do pay attention to, though, is the part where they're showing you the oxygen masks. There's a piece that just requires a bit of faith. They say it'll drop down. If you need it, they say it'll drop down in front of you. And then they say what I think is the most important piece of caregiver information that we can simply have, which is, if you want to help somebody else, put on your own mask first. Now, I've never been on an airplane where the masks drop down, and I hope never to be. And I do not know what the percentage is of people who actually follow that advice and put on their own mask first. I don't know. What I do know is the reason why they tell us that. Now, people tend to think it's because you'd go unconscious from having no oxygen and you wouldn't be around to help your loved ones. This is not why it is. You will not go unconscious necessarily very early, but what will happen is you'll lose your power to reason. Just like when people are poisoned by carbon monoxide, what they feel like doing when they're still awake is going to sleep, when what they need to feel like doing is leave the house or open a window. But they just feel sick, and so they want to go to sleep. They're not reasoning in the right direction. And this is what happens when we're oxygen deprived. So it may be that we wouldn't be unconscious at all, but that we wouldn't have the sense to help other people and then help ourselves. That is why we have to put on our own mask first. It is the same for caregiving. In caregiving, we get tired and we get cranky. I get very cranky in being a care partner for someone. I'm not looking after someone who has dementia, but I get cranky at the medical system, at the health system, and the tireder I am, the more cranky I get. And the more things that have happened, the more irritated I get. And I know that my responses then are not the responses that will be the most helpful. And so I have to always put on my own mask first. Do the things that put me in the best frame of mind, that make me able to think of the world as a place where good things can happen, where we can make changes. And one of the ways first, when we do put on our own mask first, we tend to be able to relate to others in a way that makes them able to give back to us. Some hopeful thoughts about getting help include, include the idea people are happy to help when they know what I need. are happy to help when they know what I need. Maybe this isn't true 100% of the time, but quite often it actually is true, and I stress the idea of when they know what I need. It's not always easy for us to tell what we need, possibly because we think that, well, we think we shouldn't need it. We think we shouldn't need it. I know someone right now caring for someone with dementia, and she says, I need a break. But as soon as she says it, she feels guilty. Because when she goes to the support group at the local Alzheimer's Society, she sees that other people are caring for people who are much worse than her spouse. She thinks she shouldn't need a break. And so she's worried about saying it. But in fact, she does need a break. And there is help to get her a break. There's respite services, and her spouse is very amenable to having people come in and spend time with him. He's quite happy to have a relative or a friend or someone from home care come in and be with him. So in fact, it's fine for her to need a break because he's a person that doesn't mind at all having a different caregiver. So the idea that people are happy to help when they know what I need. Or one thing that gets in the way for us is that we think that we have to pay people back. Again, this is this idea of independence. If somebody does something for me, then I need to do something for them to pay them back. When in fact, there are times in our life when we give a lot more than we get. And there's probably other times in our life when we get more than we give, particularly from some people. So one hopeful thought that people sometimes express is, well, you know, I'm looking after my loved one, so it's okay for other people to look after me a bit. I don't have to repay it now. It's the idea of paying it forward. The idea of I'm doing something for someone different could do something for me, and it would be okay. And again, a hopeful thought, I am an interesting person, and people like to be me. Quite often, I think, as caregivers, we get tired and grouchy, and people ask how we are, and then they ask, well, how's your mom? And then we you know, by the time we get finished telling the gloomy truth, we don't really feel very likable at all. But most of us, really, people do like with us, and it's important to kind of think that in order to be hopeful about getting help. And why do we need help? We need help so that we won't be so tired. We need help because sometimes others have good advice. We need help because the connection with others is one way of creating our belief that the world is a place where hopeful things can happen. Are there any comments or questions before I go into the last part of what I'm going to say this evening?
So again, if anybody does have comments or questions before Wendy gets to the last section of her talk, please go ahead and write them in the bottom right-hand corner. All right, well, Wendy, I don't see anybody typing,
all right,
but
so I want to just talk briefly about depression, because depression can be treated, and so it's good if we can recognize it. When we are caring for a loved one with dementia, it's quite easy for us to be sad, quite reasonable for us to be sad. It's quite reasonable for us to experience stress. But it's not necessarily reasonable for us to experience on an ongoing basis depression. Now, depression filters all the joy out of life, so that when we are standing next to somebody else and we're looking at the same world, They might see it as a place of possibility, but we only see it as a place where nothing good can happen. Depression filters out the joy and the possibility. And we all have bad days. And sometimes we have bad weeks. But if depression goes on and on, then it is very debilitating. At worst, it causes us to have ideas of suicide. But though most of us don't have that, it can, in fact, disable us quite severely. Signs of depression include changes in appetite, changes in sleep pattern, a sad mood all the time, day after day after day, a sense of hopelessness, feelings of really disrupted sleep, either wanting to sleep all the time or not being able to sleep. Depression is present when we have these feelings for, well, clinically when they're measuring in a very informal way, they say for an ongoing period of at least 2 weeks without a break from them. If you suspect that you have depression, the thing about depression is that it takes away your feelings that anything can be done. So, you might think, well, I have depression, but then another voice is saying to you, no, you don't. Or there's nothing that can be done about this. You're just sad. If someone says to you that you have depression, you should listen. It's probably good advice, and you should go and see someone, a doctor, a counselor. Depression is very treatable with medication, with counseling. Some depressions don't respond that well to either medication or counseling, but respond much better to both of them together. And so we should recognize depression because it can be treated. The sadness at having a loved one with dementia is normal, and we learn to live with it. We learn to be hopeful. But depression can be treated. And so because it can, we should recognize the difference and actually get treatment for it. I want to end our session tonight with with two things. The first one I like particularly because I think it's a view, one person's view of what it might be like to have dementia. Because of course each of us thinks, oh, if I had dementia, it would be horrible. I wouldn't want to live with dementia. Most of us even, we launch into severe language like I just hope that I die before I get dementia. This is an honest feeling that many of us have. But as is always the case with hopeful thoughts, there are optional, different ways to think about it. And this poem, if you're a quilter, you probably recognize it already. It's by Jenny Joseph, and I think it's one person's idea of a hopeful way to what it might be like to have dementia. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat that doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spur variety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain.
Wendy, sorry, I'm going to get you to hold on 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Apparently our sound is entirely gone. Okay. So, sorry, can you,
I'll start over.
would you mind?
I'll just start over. When I am an old woman, I shall wear purple with a red hat that doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say, we've no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I am tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my along the public railing and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick the flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit Why, you can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at one go, or only bread and pickles for a week and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. But now we must have clothes to keep us dry and pay our rent and not swear in the street and set a good example for the children. We will have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice just a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I am old and start to wear purple. Just one person's idea of what it might be like to have the kinds of changes that we have when we have dementia. And finally, I just want to make a few comments on choosing to be hopeful. You know, we can't always choose how things are going to turn out for us, and even though we want things to turn out a certain way, we can't necessarily make them. And we can't always be hopeful just because we want to either. But, well, some days I'm hopeful and others not quite so much. But it's the same world on any given day, regardless of how hopeful I am. Only the possibilities for the things I will do in the days ahead are different. Being hopeful is not wishing. Wishing is for Disneyland and birthday candles and the days when I buy a lottery ticket just because I have the money. Being hopeful is not goal setting. Goal setting is for sales teams and athletes and fundraisers at the United Way. Hopeful is a way of feeling, like when I see the world with certain possibilities of how good things could happen, but not quite enough of the picture to lay out a detailed plan. On the days when I am not hopeful, there are only I don't see them, so I think they are not there. And that is why on any given day, no matter what is happening, it is better to be hopeful if I have a choice, which sometimes I do, and sometimes I don't, which means then I have to wait until I do. So I hope that after this session today, you will be able to remember one or two things about being hopeful, that you will be able to remember to sometimes think of what I hope for in the simple language of I hope. That you'll be able to think about that so that you'll be able to act towards it. Because being their partner to someone who has dementia is not easy. It makes us tired. We need help, and we need all the hope that we can find. And now I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Maybe we'll, I'd like to check in again, and don't worry, Wendy's not going to run away here, so there's still lots of opportunity to ask questions. But I'd really like to take the opportunity just to check in. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Wendy? We've got a couple people typing here. So someone has, but a couple people have written thank you, but someone has elaborated a little bit more and said, thank you, Wendy, for sharing all your thoughts on hope. It's not every day that you get a chance to hear from a hope therapist. And Barb is still typing, and a few other people, so we'll just hold tight for a moment. So Barb has written, thank you, Wendy. It's important that there is always hope. Thank you for reminding us to find it. Mark says, thank you, Wendy. I think without hope, we have nothing. Still got a couple people typing. So we have one person who's asked, when we have those moments of hopelessness, a person just needs to look around and see that there is hope in motion. I was so excited about this. Thank you so much. I have enjoyed hearing them on this topic. So thank you so much, guys, for those wonderful comments. I don't know if Wendy, if you have anything you'd like to respond back.
Well, I just want to say to all of you, in particular, it's the one person that said to look around, that what we notice as being something that can give us hope, or peace for that matter, or happiness, or inspiration, differs for it differs for each of us, and it can be something really very simple. One of Rana Jevney, who is quite a famous hope scholar, often used to give people a disposable camera and just send them out to look for hope and take pictures of it and bring the camera back when the film was full. And she said it wasn't so much that there was all this hope in the world waiting to grab them, but that as soon as she gave them the camera, they started looking for it. Even if they thought there wasn't any, they were looking for it anyway. And I know how important it is to, even if you don't think there is any, to at least start a search, because generally it's not that difficult to find.
Excellent. What an excellent activity. Yeah. I really like that. That's very cool. So someone else has written, I think that this will help me be more positive along with my hope. Wonderful. Good. All right. So again, guys, Wendy's not running away. So please feel free, if you have more questions, go ahead and type them out. But we're actually going to take a moment before we get to the reflection questions for this evening, and we're going to do a quick activity. Now, this activity will be available to download through Dropbox. But what I'd like you to do is I want you to imagine that you have time for yourself to do whatever you want to do. You can't use this time for chores or anything related. It's just for your enjoyment and pleasure. So what I'd like you to do is identify some activity that you could do for yourself if someone gave you the gift of 15 minutes, 1 hour, 3 hours, if you had a whole day, a whole weekend, or an entire week. So what I often encourage care partners to think of when trying to identify these activities or these things that they would do just for themselves is think of things that feed your soul. That's the best way I can put it. Think of things that bring you joy. Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's going for a walk or visiting with family or friends, going on holiday. Now, I know that that not everyone might have these chunks of time available to them at this point in time in their journey as a care partner, but even think of what might you do if you did have, again, that, especially for those larger chunks of time, the weekend or the week. And if anybody has anything that they'd like to share regarding these time allotments, please go ahead and write in that bottom right-hand corner. So the goal when we think of these increments of time that we could fill with activities just for ourselves, these are these are self-care activities. They're self-focused, but they're not selfish. They're things that we need to do for ourselves. You know, it's if you think of actually in our last session, Wendy, you said something very similar. So Angie, last week, she talked about the importance in self-care and the analogy that you can't pour from an empty cup. And we heard tonight Wendy talking about putting on our oxygen mask first. We've got a couple people typing. So Sue has written a jacuzzi bubble bath. Absolutely, that is a great activity for, well, depending on what kind of person you are, maybe that's a 15-minute activity, maybe that's an hour activity. It really depends on you. But again, these are things that, activities that are self-care activities to take care of yourself, because we know that, as Wendy was talking about as care partners, this is not always, it's not always an easy journey. There are challenging moments, challenging times. And so it's really important that we do take care of ourselves, whether it's, if you want to use that analogy, putting on our oxygen mask first, filling our cup, however you want to frame it. But you guys are an important factor in this journey, and so you do need to take care of yourself. Does anybody else have any ideas or suggestions that they would like to share in terms of self-care in these time frames? I see someone is typing, so I'm going to hold tight here for a moment. Walk through the pyramids or the museum or an art gallery. Walk with a friend you have not seen in a while. Absolutely. Again, this for now typing sheet. So if no one else has anything that they'd like to share in terms of that activity, we'll move on to our reflection questions for this evening. Oh, someone has just added for the, if we go back to those taking care of me activities, to go outside, weather permitting, absolutely, and engage in the beauty, for sure. Nature is such a good opportunity. Being out in nature is such a great opportunity, a great place to recharge our batteries. Forest bathe. I'm not sure what that is, Mark, but I'm very intrigued. All right, thank you for for all the sharing, guys. Such wonderful suggestions. So we are going to on to the reflection questions for tonight. Again, guys, now since this is our last session, we won't be reflecting on these next week. It really is for tonight. So I'm just going to read through the reflection questions. And again, if anybody has anything that they would share, please feel free to go ahead and do so, again, typing in that bottom right-hand corner. So our reflection questions for tonight are, number one, to identify something that comes to mind when you think of hope. How can you use this to help maintain your hope? The second question for reflection is, who will be able to assist you in staying hopeful and reducing stress? And the final question for this week, to make a list of people that you will ask for help, and with that list, also note what you will ask them to help with. So what are those activities that they could help with? So I'll give you guys a minute here to kind of process these questions. As always, these aren't homework. You don't have to do them. They're just a way. A lot of feedback that we get from care partners is that they're helpful in helping people process all the information that we cover in a session. So I don't see anyone that no one is inclined to share, and that's okay. But I want to say thank you so much for everyone who shared throughout the evening and for joining us here tonight. So I just want to ask one more time, if anyone has any questions for Wendy. If you do, please go ahead and start typing in that bottom right-hand corner. So I'll just give you a moment if you do have something that you'd like to share in regards to those reflection questions, or if you have any remaining questions or comments for Wendy, please go ahead and type them in that bottom right-hand corner near the word send. All right, I don't see anyone typing, so we must have been very thorough this evening, Wendy. So I want to take a moment, and I do want to talk about supports through the Alzheimer's Society. So I know Wendy touched on the importance of reaching out for help, asking for help. And so we're just going to take a moment, and I want to take the opportunity to talk about some of the supports that can be accessed through the Alzheimer's Society. So for those of you potentially here in our office or even out in the surrounding area, just a reminder, or maybe an invitation if you're not already aware, that that the Alzheimer's Society in Edmonton, and then there are a few locations around the city where we do offer drop-in care partner support groups. Again, they're at different locations and different times throughout the month. For those of you who are outside of Edmonton, depending on where you're at, there may be a support group near you. We do also have the Asante Cafe, where you are right now. And if you haven't explored the cafe as of yet, there are lots of support tools like discussion boards, reading materials. We have up-and-coming webinars that you can watch if you feel so inclined. And finally, you may already be aware, but I'm going to mention it anyways, we do have other series as part of our family learning series, the Seeds of Hope. So at the top of the page, you see that I've listed the Seeds of Hope End of Life series. And this is the series, the next series in the Seeds of Hope after the late stage series, but you can go on. We've already recorded this series as well as early and middle, and you can go and watch it if you like. So before we say goodnight, I'd just like to take a moment and say thank you so much to Wendy for coming in tonight and joining us. And I'd also just want to say thank you to all of you